After destroying an armored vehicle, the dragon-shaped flame Charles had formed with Hellfire continued to wreak havoc. The soldiers who had been attacked shouted for the paranormals to fight back. "There's a level 5 paranormal attacking! Not good! Hurry up and make a move!" But these paranormals looked at each other, and then they took a few steps back. They didn't know how powerful the person who attacked was, and the Hellfire wasn't something they could easily deal with. If they attacked together, they might be able to finish off their opponent. However, it was dark outside. Even though the glow of the Hellfire lit up their surroundings, they still couldn't see their enemy clearly. None of them wanted to be the first to risk their life to make a move and potentially die in the process, so none of them dared step forward. Then, another deep blue fire dragon appeared. Charles looked at the people around him and couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. He had already killed more than 30 enemies, including a few paranormals, and he had opened a hole in the enemy's blockade, but none of them tried to escape. The soldiers who had sealed off the encirclement kept firing, trying to use their firepower to cover up the gap in the siege. Then the lightning cadaver serpent spat out a blue electric arc that landed on dozens of soldiers simultaneously, paralyzing them and making them fall to the ground. Charles's attack had been a distraction to protect the creature as it continued to prey on the soldiers. Although the serpent was stealthy in the dark, Charles still needed to train the creature in various battle scenarios. Therefore, he provided cover for his pet as it attacked, and the serpent's attack caused a more significant gap in the defense line. Charles shouted to the crowd, "Run! Do you guys want to stay here and die?" Driven by a strong desire to survive, there were people who desperately wanted to escape through the gap, even if it meant they would be shot at. "The monsters are coming from behind," Charles continued to shout. "If you don't run, you'll die." This sentence ignited their desire for survival, and people recklessly ran toward the gap. Some soldiers raised the machine guns in their hands and wanted to shoot, but the lightning cadaver serpent quickly dealt with them. Lightning cadaver serpents that had already reached level 4 could crush most level 5 beings with their strength. Dealing with these weak soldiers was naturally a piece of cake. After seeing this scene, people's desire to escape became even greater. "Staying here will only lead to death. Escaping now is our only hope. Run! Fight through these bastards!" Their fear of death and their hope for survival made the people desperately attack the gap. The number of people trying to escape had reached over 1,000, and the gap had already expanded uncontrollably. Charles and the lightning cadaver serpent took advantage of the night to fell the paranormals one by one. Charles could use the energy of any of his enemies to increase his own power, but paranormals were the best targets for him, as they provided the most significant improvement in his strength. The paranormals wanted to fight back, but when they saw the crowd swarming out, they instinctively grew fearful. Charles took care of the soldiers with machine guns first. Just one of his weakest attacks could take care of a large number of them. Seeing more and more soldiers being killed, the remaining miners had a stronger desire to survive, and they carelessly rushed out. Even if most of them only had the strength of a level 1 martial artist and couldn't resist bullets, as long as they didn't get hit in the vitals, they wouldn't die immediately. Thus, under sway of the mob mentality, the soldiers' blockade was quickly broken. They knew that if they stayed behind, they would be food for the cyborg beasts or would be shot to death. It was better to desperately flee to the outside world and still have hope of survival. Previously, they had been so meek because they couldn't see any hope. But as long as they were given a real chance to live, they would still fight back with all their might. "Don't run! Whoever runs will be killed!" Fear appeared in the eyes of some of the officers. They knew the consequences of letting these workers escape, so they desperately tried to maintain order. But then a few cyborg beasts pounced on them like wild animals on the hunt, far more mobile and ferocious than any zombie. The cyborg beast became the last straw that crushed the camel's back, causing the blockade formed by the Stellar Technology soldiers to collapse completely. Some paranormals looked at each other, and then they quietly escaped. They knew that if news of today's affair were to spread, it would cause very serious consequences for them, and Stellar Technology's reputation would be destroyed. Therefore, they wanted to take advantage of the fact that they had yet to label themselves as Stellar Technology members, and run away while pretending not to know anything. In any case, there was more than one fortress nearby, and they thought they could still find a place to hide elsewhere, even if some people recognized them as traitors. Even if they were to be singled out, they thought they would be fine as long as they refused to admit what they had done. So a large number of paranormals began to flee for their lives, and the Stellar Technology soldiers' defense line collapsed once again. Charles seized this rare opportunity. If he had to confront them head-on, he wouldn't be able to face the siege of dozens of paranormals. But since they had already begun to flee, it was his best chance to strike. He held the Sword of Death in his hand and struck them all down as they ran. The Lightning Cadaver Serpent devoured them as they fell. These paranormals were more delicious to the creature than ordinary people who weren't nearly as nutritious. Those who were running away ignored the casualties behind them. They assumed the people dying behind them were just ordinary people, as paranormals were very hard to kill. But if they had just turned around and seen their comrades falling in battle, they would have found that they were sorely mistaken. It was a long night, and Charles's rampage continued seemingly without end. When the long night had finally passed, and the first ray of light had risen in the east, Charles had almost converted all the soul energy he had refined into his strength. He had killed more than 100 people that night, and most of them had been at least level 3 fighters. But all these gains had only allowed him to increase his power slightly as a level 4 paranormal. However, the cultivation method he practiced was very special and powerful, and there was much more to it than met the eye. He was already incredibly strong as a level 4 paranormal, and he could even hold his own against level 6 fighters. Unless he ran into enemy paranormals who were similarly gifted at their particular cultivation level, he felt he had nothing to fear. After he stabilized the soul energy in his body, the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was Olivia looking at him like he was a monster. He smiled at her and said, "What, is there a big zit on my face?" Initially, he had had some thoughts about Olivia, but with the progress of his relationship with Miranda, he had gradually withdrawn from her. Unfortunately for him, his interest in Olivia had soured his relationship with Miranda, and had caused much unneeded drama in the base. He knew he shouldn't go out of his way to pursue Olivia, as there were many women who would be far less complicated for him to be involved with. But if she showed interest in him, he certainly wouldn't refuse. Olivia looked at him incredulously. Was there a misunderstanding with the scouting mission? She had thought that Charles had been planning to do reconnaissance alone, solely to gather information about the enemy. But she hadn't expected that he would destroy the entire base after he had scouted it out. When she had quietly rushed to the camp, there had been nothing left except dead bodies and broken walls. Charles sighed and said, "What were those idiots thinking? They only used 2,000 people to guard more than 10,000 people. Do they think they're still in the old era?" Most people still couldn't adapt to the changes the new era brought. Although many people tried their best to resist the surrounding environment, they weren't adapting. They were just barely getting by with tactics they kept from the old era. In the past, even just 100 or so people with heavy machine guns could control more than 10,000 people. However, in this era, guns were far less frightening to people. In the past, when people had gotten shot in battle, they had typically been either crippled or killed in the process. And if the front lines had fallen, those in the rear had been swiftly shot down too. But in the new era, people's physical fitness had significantly improved over time, and a gunshot wound wasn't a death sentence anymore. The impact of a bullet was almost like being cut by a shard of glass, and soldiers could still charge forward when shot and take down the gunners if they could just endure the pain. After Charles's rampage, everyone in the Dawn Alliance was filled with fear of the unknown. They worried that they would be the next to die, and they struggled to unite as they were frozen with terror. "I can see why you're not worried about people opposing you," Olivia said. "No one in their right mind would mess with you." The Alliance's internal structure was divided into groups. This was an inevitable trend and was also human instinct. Because humans were social animals in this dangerous world, only by forming groups could they comfort each other. But even if they formed groups, no one dared to oppose Charles. They all knew that the Alliance united because of Charles's prestige. If someone had the audacity to provoke him, then they would be their enemy of the whole Alliance. Perhaps his influence would weaken as time went by, but as long as Charles could maintain his absolute strength, no one would be able to challenge his position, not even Olivia. "It's good that you understand," Charles said, "but you should still practice your usual cultivation. We don't have an endless supply of medicinal crystal cores, so you shouldn't rely on them." Olivia shook her head. "You're already more than strong enough on your own. You don't need my help. If you don't take advantage of this moment to consolidate the Alliance, you might not have another chance like this. Charles didn't try to persuade her anymore. He knew everyone was entitled to their own thoughts. Furthermore, Olivia was right. His strength was already enough. He realized that when the development of the Alliance was truly on the right track, she would finally have the heart to hone her own strength. Following that, Olivia told the entire Alliance what had happened the previous night, and a few members spoke up when she finished. Are those bastards from Stellar Technology coming again? This is our home. If anyone dares to threaten it, we'll fight them to the death. Life in the fortress was difficult. The crops in the fields had only just started to mature, and the food problem that everyone had been worried about for a month had finally been solved. But now some strangers wanted to destroy their home, and no matter who wanted to ruin their hard-earned peace, they had to fight to the end for it. A few people had left the fortress quietly when they had realized this, and Charles had pretended not to see them. There was no safe place in the outside world. Most of the army's forces surrounded Butte, and there wasn't much food or anything else that could be given to ordinary people. The last time they had spoken, the commander had told Charles that they wouldn't have enough food to supply both the soldiers involved in a protracted battle and the ordinary civilians living their daily lives. Charles had replied that the food supplies would be enough. He had suggested that if ordinary people wanted to eat, they could either fight as payment for food or go and find it for themselves. There were many mutated creatures and plants in the outside world. If people took the risk, there was still a chance to obtain food. Some smart people learned how to build survival bases during their time in the Dawn Alliance. They started to build their own homes with farmland as the core. Since they didn't have the protection of the energy shield, they still needed to worry about being attacked by monsters. But anyone willing to build and protect a new home would still be able to live a relatively peaceful life. However, the problem of their water source wasn't so easy to solve. The Dawn Alliance had the Spirit Spring, so they didn't need to worry about finding water. But those who left the Alliance could only go to the nearby canals and rivers to get water for irrigation. As the Dawn Alliance members gossiped among themselves, the news about Stellar Technology spread like wildfire. About 5,000 to 6,000 miners had escaped from Stellar Technology's control and had detailed all the company's crimes in the nearby fortress. When they heard about the atrocities Stellar Technology had committed, the Dawn Alliance members were filled with righteous indignation. But their anger disappeared just as quickly as it had arisen. Stellar Technology controlled many firearms. With the company's large number of weapons and their unusual amount of paranormals, how could the Alliance have the courage to confront them head-on? Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, some teams from the Dawn Alliance who went out to hunt discovered the tracks of Stellar Technology's main force from afar. After that, they quickly returned to the Alliance to report. When they heard that the people from Stellar Technology were about to arrive, the members of the Dawn Alliance chatted with each other excitedly. I've always hated those bastards. We should kill them! Who do they think they are, threatening our home like this? Do they have a death wish? Although they had only been with the Alliance for a short time, it hadn't been easy for them to find a place to settle down that looked like home. How could they allow outsiders to destroy it? These people felt a sense of true belonging in the Alliance, and they were determined to fight to the death to protect their new home. They readied for battle as the upper echelons of the Alliance also gathered together. Just as the army of Stellar Technology was approaching the base, many people suddenly arrived from other directions. Charles was confused. What's going on? He asked Olivia, who had a strange look on her face. They all said they don't like what Stellar Technology is doing, she replied. They said they want to fight against them with us. Hearing her words, everyone became extremely excited. They knew that if they could obtain unexpected reinforcements, they might be able to avoid many losses, and their chances of fighting against the enemy would be even greater. Kevin asked, "How many of them are there?" And Olivia replied, "Over 30,000. This is too much of a coincidence, Kevin said. If Stellar Technology controls these 30,000 people, then letting them enter the base will cause us immeasurable losses. Even if they're only controlling a portion of them, if they suddenly attack, we'll be in trouble." Everyone sank into thought as they wondered why the reinforcements had arrived just then. They knew that if there were really a problem with them, it would certainly bring disaster. Miranda frowned slightly. But we can't easily lock all of them outside the base, she said. No matter whether they're reinforcements or spies, if we try to do that, they'll become our enemy. If these people were controlled by stellar technology, letting them in would be a death sentence. But if they were actual reinforcements, then rejecting them would offend all of them. Olivia said, now that the news about the Dawn Alliance has spread, there are many people who want to seek refuge with us. Only stellar technology's presence is holding them back from joining up. So of course, they want to fight them. Harper asked, are these reinforcements all one entity or many groups? They're many small groups, Olivia replied. Harper nodded. It's unlikely that stellar technology could control so many people in so many different groups, she said. Unless the soldiers are holding them at gunpoint, they wouldn't be able to move a crowd like this, and that doesn't seem to be the case. Olivia's eyes lit up. You mean? Ordinary stellar technology soldiers were very weak, and they couldn't possibly make a horde of thousands of people obey them. Even though the soldiers had forced people to work in the mines, it had taken more than 2,000 soldiers threatening them with machine guns and many paranormals to assist them. The miners would never have obeyed them if they hadn't been severely outnumbered. After all, the soldiers of stellar technology weren't regular soldiers. They were just ordinary people who had been forced into battle by the company, and so their discipline was extremely limited. Don't get too excited, though, Harper continued. I do think that most of the people here are innocent. After all, as long as news about the Alliance spreads, it'll attract a lot of people. But their arrival is too coincidental, and they all got here at the same time. Something's wrong here. Miranda said, you're saying that these people didn't come here on their own accord, but rather that stellar technology tried to cause trouble and forcefully unite them? Harper nodded. That's what I mean. Everyone suddenly felt a chill down their backs as they realized the trap they had found themselves stuck in. A small number of stellar technology spies controlled most of the groups, and they had worked together to bring all the people to the Alliance's base at the same time to use them as cover. If the Dawn Alliance let these people in, then the spies would stab them in the back at a critical moment. But if they didn't let them in, the spies would turn against the crowd and cause untold bloodshed. A voice rang out from one of the groups. We came to help you and you're locking us out? What's going on here? Miranda muttered to herself. Letting them in is like taking in a time bomb, but not letting them in is picking a fight against more than 30,000 people. We're totally screwed either way. Zach said to Harper, do you have any ideas? Everyone's eyes turned to Harper. Since she could see through all of this conspiracy, did she have a solution? Harper looked at Charles and said, I haven't thought of anything yet. It wasn't that she hadn't thought of a solution. She was just afraid that her plan would seem too simple. Charles smiled. It doesn't matter what it is. Even if it's just a thought, you can say it. We'll figure it out together. Zach looked at Harper encouragingly. Babe, don't worry about right or wrong. Just say it. He didn't know much about the ways of the world, but he felt that Harper might be afraid to make the wrong call and cause people to get hurt because of it. He also couldn't think of any plans of his own. Zach's words gave Harper inexplicable courage. That's right, she thought. Why should I be afraid to show off my ideas? In any case, it's fine as long as I have a clear conscience. No matter what happens, Zach will stand by me. Harper cleared her throat and said confidently, we absolutely can't be enemies with more than 30,000 people. Otherwise our reputation will be ruined, and everyone will be against us. There will be no place for us anywhere around here. Olivia said, then do you have a way to get rid of those stellar technology spies? The Alliance members all knew that if they planned to let the groups of people in, they needed a way to get rid of the spies before they attacked. If they played their cards right, they would get a full army of reinforcements, and the Dawn Alliance's influence would expand. However, if they fumbled their plan, they would be ambushed and would suffer incalculable loss. Harper's eyes were cold. Our enemies are about to arrive. We don't have the time and energy to examine all of these people one by one. We don't have enough people to help. Olivia was despondent. What should we do? Just as everyone was waiting for Harper's next answer, Charles said, since we can't eliminate the threat, we need to think of a way to minimize the damage. We might even be able to turn this to our advantage. Harper heaved a quiet sigh of relief that Charles had taken over. Her backup strategy was vicious, and she feared that if she said it out loud, it might change Zach's opinion of her for the worse. Zach was the most important thing in her life. She had just wanted to use him at first, but as she had spent more time with him, she had gradually begun to care about him. She knew that in this world, he was the only person she could rely on. Miranda's expression darkened as she realized what Charles was implying. Do you want the stellar technology plants to reveal themselves by lashing out among the reinforcements? She asked in disbelief, even though she already understood his intent. She knew she couldn't bear the brunt of the spy's attack herself, but she was shocked that Charles wanted to effectively use the reinforcements as a shield for the Alliance. Lena also found Charles's plan hard to accept. If we do that, it'll hurt those who want to help us. Charles replied, since they're the ones who brought the problem to us, shouldn't they have to deal with it themselves? Kindness doesn't command soldiers, and you have to pay the price for doing something wrong. Kevin agreed. On the battlefield, a mistake can cost thousands of casualties. It's the same for us. If an Alliance member makes the wrong call, it can get us all killed. If they don't do it on purpose, they'll be exempt from punishment, but someone still has to take responsibility for all the lives lost. Lena looked at Kevin with a confounded expression. You seriously agree with him? Kevin said, if you have a better idea, I'm all ears. Lena lowered her head, gritted her teeth, and bit her lip. A better idea. A better idea. Those three words raced through her head. Perhaps there would be a better way, but no ideas were coming to her. Moreover, time didn't wait for anyone. Charles said to Olivia, you're in charge of commanding everyone to guard the exits. Close all the gaps in the energy shield, and then stand behind the defensive measures to prepare for the battle after the shield is broken. Kevin and I will go and welcome the arrival of those reinforcements. Alice asked, what about me? Charles said, your team will stay behind to stabilize the energy shield. As long as you protect the node of the shield, they won't be able to attack. Don't worry about them having more paranormals than us. We shouldn't be afraid of them. With that, he and Kevin started to head off to welcome the reinforcements when Lena chimed in. I'll go too. Since she couldn't stop them, she figured she might as well join them. She also wanted to see the cruelty of war personally. Although she had experienced some of it during the last battle, she felt it was unacceptable for people to die under her watch. Charles shook his head. No, your acting skills aren't good enough. They can tell at a glance what you want to do to them. Stay on the watchtower. I have a mission for you. Lena huffed with disappointment. Is it a reconnaissance mission? It's the main mission, Charles replied. Lena was stunned. The main mission? What could he mean by that? She wondered. But when she snapped out of her daze, Charles and Kevin had already departed. After Charles had left, everyone began to set up an emergency defense mission. Although Charles had already prepared powerful energy shields to protect them, it didn't mean that they could relax their vigilance. After all, they knew that stellar technology might have level 5 paranormals that they would have to deal with as well. Zach leaned into Harper's ear. Don't worry about what I'll think of you, he whispered. Even if that was your plan instead of Charles's, I wouldn't think any less of you. Harper's mind went blank. She said shakily, how'd you know that was my idea too? She had always known that Zach wasn't really the fool he appeared to be. He just didn't like to think too much about the ways of the world. However, she hadn't expected that he could see right through her so easily. Zach said, although I don't like to think about stuff like this, it doesn't mean that I don't understand. I could tell that Charles didn't want you to have to be the one to propose the idea. Harper felt panic well up inside her. She was terrified that Zach would see her as a bad person, and she feared that she would lose him. Zach gently pulled her into his arms. I don't care if people say you're good or evil, he said. I only know one thing. You're doing what you can to protect people, and that's enough for me. Harper burst into tears and buried her head in his chest, overwhelmed with gratitude that she had finally found someone who understood her. Why'd you stop? Kevin asked Charles as he saw him staring at Harper and Zach. Is something wrong? Charles smiled bitterly and said, It's okay. Let's go. He had sensed Harper and Zach's interaction with his soul energy, and as he had watched them, he had suddenly realized that he had overlooked a big problem. He now saw that no matter how much Harper tried to control her emotions, especially those regarding Zack, they still got the better of her at times. Perhaps she had the talent to become as strong as Olivia, but the harsh environment didn't give her much chance to grow, and her body was still frail. The thing she needed the most in order to grow was to learn to rely on herself. The second most important thing she needed was a person who could understand her. She'd been lucky enough to pick Zack, a partner who was not only reliable, but who truly understood her. What could have been a selfish fling had turned into true love, a rarity in the post-apocalyptic era. Charles and Kevin quickly arrived at the area where the 30,000 reinforcements were gathered. Seeing Charles's arrival, more than 20 groups' representatives had already come over, and they rushed at the chance to speak to him. "We're here to support you," one said. "We can't stand Stellar Technologies' evil deeds. Even if we have to risk our lives to take them down, we'll still fight." "Right! We'll fight them to the death," another added. "As long as you're willing to feed us and give us a place to stay, we're ready for battle." Charles and Kevin were silent for a while as they listened to everyone talking simultaneously. It was just as the two men had expected. These people were genuinely there to help, and since they were willing to help, Charles thought it would be cruel to simply turn them away. He knew that even if they had ulterior motives, if they were willing to fight to the death for the Alliance, then the reasonable thing for him to do was to let them. Although everyone wanted to fight side by side with the Dawn Alliance in name, they were usually just trying to find an excuse to stay in the survival base. Even so, if it had been any other time, Charles would have let them in without hesitation. He never cared about rebellion from small groups or anything like that because he was confident that he could assimilate everyone and establish himself as their leader. But at this critical moment, having to try to integrate all of these thousands of people into the Alliance before a key battle would only be a hindrance. Even if they truly wanted to help the Alliance, Charles could only let them down. "Everyone listen to me. I'm really happy that everyone is willing to fight side by side with me," he said, pretending to be moved. "It's just that the enemy has a lot of weapons, and we're all just flesh and blood. There's no need to risk our lives." A big man named Mark Garcia stepped forward and said, "What are you afraid of? Even if they have guns, they're still just a bunch of animals. Do you think we can't beat them?" He and the people behind him burst into laughter. At that moment, they were truly fearless. If they hadn't been, they wouldn't have rushed over to the base to fight Stellar Technology with their lives on the line. Instead, they would have waited until the war was over to try to join up. The Dawn Alliance's reputation was already considerable. According to Olivia's incomplete information, at least 300,000 to 400,000 people wanted to join them. They knew that this number wasn't exaggerated, because more than 20 fortresses had been built under the protection of the Montreal military, and there were more than 600,000 survivors in each fortress. They also knew that the number was possibly even lower than it would have been if proper methods of communicating with people far away had been developed. The Alliance's situation could only be transmitted to 4 strongholds nearby. Any people further away would have doubts about whether the information they obtained was accurate or not. Otherwise, the number of people who wanted to join the Alliance would likely have exceeded 1 million. The fact that these people had arrived at the time they had, even if there was doubt regarding their motives, was enough to prove they would be dedicated soldiers for the Alliance. The military had already given out a lot of bulletproof vests and riot armor. As long as these people had battled against the monsters and had defended the fortress, they had received proper battle supplies, so they weren't worried about fighting against Stellar Technologies' guns. As the reinforcements continued to try to persuade Charles, he couldn't refuse them any longer. "Since everyone's come from afar and wants to fight side by side with us, we'll let you," he said. "It's just that our troops have finished training. They've been working well with each other. I'm not sure where you guys will fit in." Mark's expression grew annoyed, and the people behind him scowled. "Are you trying to chase us away?" he asked. "We didn't come all this way just to be turned away at the gates." One member of the group, a young man named William, said in a mocking tone, "Could it be that the Dawn Alliance is so small that it can't accommodate us?" Several of the others chimed in. "If the Dawn Alliance doesn't care about us, then we don't care about joining." "That's right, let's go fight on our own. We're not going with them anymore." Seeing that everyone was unhappy, Charles hurriedly said, "I haven't finished speaking. What are you all in a hurry for? I only said that our own people already work well together, but I didn't say that I wouldn't arrange for you all to join." Mark scoffed. "Then what do you plan to do with us?" Charles pointed at the houses not far away and the trenches in the ground near them. "This is what we've already built for defense," he said. "You just need to familiarize yourselves with it. There are some firearms in the machine gun installment in the distance, and you can use them however you want. We have a total of 6 entrances here. All you need to do is guard one of them." "Are you looking down on us?" Mark said sarcastically. "You want us to defend an entrance with more than 30,000 people? Will you defend the remaining entrance with more than 20,000 people? What does that mean? You're expecting us to fail?" Kevin took a step forward and said coldly, "We still need some troops to fight the enemy head-on, but we want to be the main force to defend against the enemy's firepower. If you want to sign up, you can. If you aren't satisfied with this arrangement, you can go to the battlefield with us." His words made many people think of retreating, because they knew that being sent to the front lines of the battlefield could be a death sentence. They were willing to join the fight, but it didn't mean that they were willing to be a suicide squad. Kevin glanced at everyone around him. "Of course there's a third option, which is that when we're busy fighting in the front, you can attack the enemy's backlines from behind. It's up to you to decide whether you'd like to face the enemy or defend." William's expression was gloomy. "We're here to help you fight, but you can't look down on us," he shouted. "At least give us more defensive options." Charles looked at him angrily. "How do you know we have more defensive options? Who told you that?" When Charles's voice faded, the atmosphere became murderous. William could almost feel the silence as something tangible, and all he could hear was his own heartbeat. Paralyzed by fear, he could barely move. The paranormals around him were all trembling. They could tell that Charles was looking for a fight, if not worse. And knowing that he had a reputation as a killing machine, they didn't dare to make a sound. Charles's next words rang out like a voice from the very depths of hell, infused with a fearsome and strange power, and he terrified everyone even more. "I'm asking you a question. How did you know that we have multiple lines of defense?" William wanted to answer, but didn't want to incur Charles's wrath. The people around him seemed to be expecting him to do something, but he didn't know what to do. Fear had scrambled his brain, and he felt helpless. No one knew how many people Charles had already killed, but they knew it was a great number, and they didn't want to be part of his tally. One of the paranormals standing a little further away felt his teeth chattering with terror. "Isn't that something everyone knows about?" he asked, the effort of replying to Charles's question leaving him exhausted. Charles's demeanor changed very quickly, and he said, "It seems like I've misunderstood the situation." William fell to his knees in a cold sweat, weeping uncontrollably as the fear and tension flowed away. His body shook with relief, and despite desperately wanting to say something, the words just wouldn't come. "No one will take me seriously now," he thought. "They must think I'm so feeble, making an exhibition of myself like this. I'm such a loser." Charles's gaze swept around the crowd as he said, "We don't have a fixed defense point. Because the area covered by the energy shield is so large, we'll have to seal all the entrances and then decide how to proceed with the battle when we've analyzed the enemy's movements. That's where the misunderstanding arose. I'm sorry if I sounded harsh." Everyone was quick to reassure him that they understood why he had reacted as he had. One said, "It's fine, we get it. We're all under pressure here." Another added, "And we know how concerned you are about the Dawn Alliance. Everybody understands." Having seen how powerful Charles could be, and what terrible vengeance he could wreak, no one was going to argue with him. William was still kneeling and crying, feeling very embarrassed. He knew full well that it would be very difficult to get Charles to see him as anything other than weak after his breakdown. "My reputation's in tatters now," he thought. "How could I recover and make Charles believe I'm a strong fighter?" Charles didn't care much about his people's feelings. He was a man of action and wanted his soldiers to show courage and resourcefulness, not weakness. He said to William, "If you still want to be part of my army, get up, pull yourself together, and start planning how to defend this area. I'm delegating it specifically to you, so don't let me down. This is your chance to prove yourself to me." Charles had switched quickly from fighting mode to planning their next steps. He turned to the senior officers and warned, "The Alliance has made a lot of preparations for battle. Please restrain your subordinates and don't let them go running around. There are traps out there. If anyone gets caught by one of them, there will be no hope for them." "Yes, sir," answered William quickly. "We'll make sure our troops behave and stay safe," Oliver said. Everyone admired Charles's leadership and his ability to plan quickly, and no one dared to disobey now that they knew what he was capable of. Charles replied, "Thank you, and don't worry about food rations. I'll arrange for supplies to be dealt with." And then he left with Kevin. After Charles had gone, everyone gathered around Mark Garcia, the leader of the group. Someone said to him, "I thought you were supposed to be our leader. How come you didn't say anything?" Mark replied, "It's not like you don't know how big a level 5 energy shield is. From the size of this shield, you should know that the leaders here shouldn't be trifled with, and yet you still go looking for trouble. You've only got yourselves to blame." As he spoke, he cast a dissatisfied glance at William, thinking, they were all pretty scared by seeing Charles in action, but at least they didn't all collapse like this guy. "Let's move on," said Mark. "We can't blame Charles and his people for putting on a show of strength. We knew about his reputation before we came here. There's nothing wrong with his way of doing things, and as long as we keep in with him and obey orders, we'll be fine." Everyone nodded in agreement. They had all done their homework before they had sought out the Dawn Alliance, so they had known what to expect, but Charles's powers had still surprised them. Even though they were a band of 30,000 nomadic warriors, they had already chosen to try to join up with the Dawn Alliance after the first insect battle. Despite their nomadic roots, those who were confident in their abilities had decided they would like to settle down somewhere permanent, and the Alliance seemed like the perfect fit for their skills. They knew that the Alliance would be doing them a favor by letting them join as reinforcements, as the Alliance had already amassed a huge number of members, and the group was determined to earn their keep in return. Meanwhile, Charles thought about what had just happened as he walked away with Kevin. The ancient book talked about an ability called Divine Might that could materialize a deadly aura and use it to shock others' souls. It could even harm others if the user so desired. He had used this ability in his previous life, but this was the first time he had used it in his new one, and he hadn't expected that it would be so powerful. Much to his surprise, it had tapped into his aura from his previous life as well, and the crowd of reinforcements had served as his unwitting test subjects for this improved and even more terrifying power. Charles had had plenty of experience of killing in his previous life. During the 10 years of that apocalypse, he had fought so many battles and had dispatched so many enemies to their deaths that he felt his hands were indelibly stained with blood. Even so, he thought, I didn't know how stunningly effective it was going to be to tap into my divine might and let loose all that deadly aura from my past life. It certainly got the job done. Looking at Kevin, he said, I think my reputation will always go before me now, so there won't be any need to try to intimidate people like William back there anymore. Kevin looked at Charles in surprise as he saw him smile to himself, deep in thought. But he decided just to say, I think we ought to be getting back to the others. They've had enough time to realize that they shouldn't mess with you. He had often wondered about Charles's past, but thought better of probing any further. Everyone had their secrets, after all. The defensive formation the Dawn Alliance had set up was very secure. A total of 4 of the 6 entrances had been sealed, and one of the entrances has been handed over to the reinforcements. The remaining entrance was where Charles's watchtower was located, and he had already arranged for it to be guarded, even though it was the most difficult place to attack. The defense line there was built with energy shields as its foundation, which were much more effective against earth element paranormals than ordinary stone walls. Stone walls could collapse. In this new era, defense tactics from the old days couldn't be used. They just weren't effective enough against paranormals. Charles was an excellent tactician, and he understood the new era and what was needed in war, so his team was happy to leave defense plans to him. Back inside the watchtower, Olivia asked Charles, Are you happy with the defenses? Yes, replied Charles, nodding. Everything looks great. Olivia trusted his judgment, so if he said the correct defenses were in place, that was good enough for her. Charles asked her, Who are the people in charge of the military in the Alliance now? Olivia replied, Alex, Taylor, Jason, Robert, and me. Charles frowned. Why are there only 5 of you? When we first established the Dawn Alliance, there were 6 deputy chiefs, but now there are only 5? Olivia looked at him, knowing she had already told him about this some time ago. But he wasn't interested in administrative detail, and he clearly hadn't remembered what she had said. "One of the 6 deputy chiefs is dead," she replied. "That's why there are only 5 of us now." Charles nodded and asked, "What happened? How did they die?" Olivia replied, "He was a level 3 paranormal, but because he couldn't reach level 4, he was no use to us. We need level 4 paranormals as leaders, or how can they give orders to the people only at level 3? At that time, there were fewer than 30 paranormals who had reached level 4 out of the 400 paranormals in the Dawn Alliance. "Fine," said Charles. "Let them take their troops into the military defense system and arrange for them to take turns to rest. This is a protracted battle. Everyone needs to grab some downtime when they can." Olivia was shocked. "Aren't you planning to attack immediately?" Charles said, "Of course I want to attack, but that doesn't conflict with a protracted war." Although Olivia was still puzzled, she still gave the order according to Charles's instructions. "It's not my problem if things go wrong," she thought. "He's given the order, and I'm just doing as he said. It'll be down to him if he fails, not me." An hour later, the Stellar Technology Army began to gather in formation, but they were in no hurry to attack. The Dawn Alliance had established itself in open countryside, and Stellar Technology's commanders decided to make camp over the border in the neighboring county. Dale asked Charles, "Do you think they're planning a long, drawn-out battle?" Charles shook his head and replied, "They're just waiting for the right moment to attack." Stellar Technology's long-term aim was to take over this area so they could mine its resources and build more biotechnology factories for their experiments on turning humans into bioweapons. The Stellar Technology commanders knew that the best way to gain control of any fortress was from the inside, and with having already taken heavy losses among their troops, they didn't want to risk another deadly battle. But they did need people for their experiments, and they were desperate to take down the Dawn Alliance, so they drew up a plan to infiltrate the fortress. Their commander issued an order to his deputy: "Choose 12 of your bravest troops and send them out for the Dawn Alliance to take prisoner. The Alliance will take them inside the fortress, and they'll have a foothold in there. Brief them on what they're to do when they're inside, and make sure they're all high-level paranormals." "Yes, sir," replied the deputy. "I'll send our best people. They'll be honored to be given such an important task." A little later, Dale and Charles were still scanning the land around the fortress when Dale said, "Look, there must be a dozen or so enemy soldiers coming this way. What on earth are they thinking?" "Take them down," ordered Charles. Some of the Dawn Alliance troops picked up their machine guns and began to fire. A hail of bullets rang out, but the enemy troops were unharmed. "What the—" Dale began to speak, only to be silenced by Charles. "Quiet, Dale," he said, one of them shouting something. The leader of the Stellar Technology soldiers called out, "Is this how the Dawn Alliance treats its guests?" "You don't look much like guests," replied Dale. "Don't tell me all this firepower is to make friends with us," said the enemy soldier. Dale shouted back, "We don't welcome outsiders." "Yeah, get out of here before we kill you," shouted another Dawn Alliance soldier. All the Dawn Alliance soldiers hated Stellar Technology. Their early training had taught them all about their enemy and their terrible war crimes, and they wanted them dead. The lead paranormal of the Stellar Technology group waved his hand and created an Earth Dragon. "I know you have a level 5 paranormal as your leader, so you should know what this dragon means," he said. "Seeing as you won't negotiate peacefully with us, I'll let it loose on all of you." He let the Earth Dragon fly toward the energy shield, and Charles knew full well that it could only withstand attacks from paranormal energy of level 4 and below. This was a level 5 attack. Charles watched as the Earth Dragon's body grew larger and sped in their direction. The Alliance troops readied their defensive equipment, and Charles shouted at Lena, "Use the flaming arrows." At that moment, Zack raised his hand and released a gleaming fireball, and the enemy paranormal's expression changed to one of absolute terror. A battle between an Earth Dragon and a gleaming fireball was a sight to behold. Both were symbols of level 5 paranormal power, and they required great skill to control. Zack's gleaming fireball was formed with true fire, and it couldn't be controlled in the same way as an ordinary fireball weapon. a level 4 paranormal could only use fire-repellent magic to barely control true fire. And for a level 5 paranormal to handle true fire so proficiently was extremely impressive. "I've just got to do it," Zack had thought, before he let the gleaming fireball fly. There's no time to lose. He was shocked by the power of his gleaming fireball. He hadn't realized just how fast it would travel, or how much energy it would produce. And he hadn't known the effect of the special bracelet Charles had given him. He realized what had happened and thought, it must be the Crimson Flame Energy Gem. It looks simple, but it's not. Its power is absolutely terrifying. Zack knew that even if he used fire-repellent magic to control the true fire, he would still need a lot of practice. But now that I have a Crimson Flame Gem on my wrist, I just need to release the true fire from it, he thought. The gleaming fireball whistled away from Zack, and in an instant, it crushed the Earth Dragon into a heap of dust and stones. But that didn't consume all of the fireball's power. They continued hurtling toward the Stellar Technology soldiers. One of them shouted, "Quick, defend us against it! Block it!" The Stellar Technology Level 5 Paranormal summoned up a huge wall from the ground that shone like crystal as it blocked the gleaming fireball's path. Just as Zack could control the true fire, this man could crystallize earth and stone. The two Level 5 Paranormals with their amazing superpowers faced each other across the battlefield. But the Stellar Technology Paranormal hadn't used his superpower properly, and he had only added a thin layer of protective crystal to the earth wall under his control. The crystal protection layer shattered instantly under the gleaming fireball's attack. The Stellar Technology leader shouted an order to his troops. "Attack now! Use whatever you can!" Water shields, ice shields, earth walls, and wind walls were all brought into play. The 11 other Stellar Technology soldiers threw every power they possessed at the gleaming flame, and it finally burned itself out under their heavy and prolonged assault. Having broken through the Earth Wall's crystal protection layer, its power had been weakened, and it fizzled away. Stellar Technology's Level 5 Paranormal wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and sighed with relief. He hadn't expected to encounter such a terrifying opponent. This first attack had put his entire team in a very dangerous situation. He said to his troops, "I won't do that again. It was far too dangerous. I thought we'd all escape unscathed no matter what they could throw at us. But I didn't realize they had a level 5 paranormal who could unleash the power of a Crimson Flame Energy Gem and control true fire." Those were the last words he would ever speak. Just as he had heaved that sigh of relief, a red arrow pierced his chest at lightning speed. When Zack had launched his fireball attack, Lena had drawn her bow and had shot the arrow as Charles had ordered. The Stellar Technology Paranormal saw the red light hit his chest before he felt the pain, and his world filled with red. The flaming arrow was infused with 7 explosive flame amulets, and the explosion it created was massive. It shattered the Stellar Technology Level 5 Paranormal into 1,000 pieces, but still its power wasn't fully used up. The enormous explosion also shook the other soldiers, who tried to flee but found their escape blocked. One of them shouted, "Use your superpowers to protect yourselves." Her quick thinking saved their lives, but they sustained serious injuries. As the Stellar Technology soldiers tried to run, Alice threw up an ice wall. They attacked it and eventually managed to break through, but despite their best efforts to save themselves, they were too weak to fight on. They could see that they had lost some of their number in the battle, along with a rescue party who had been sent out to try to help them. All that remained of their bodies was a pile of ash. One of the Stellar Technology soldiers said to the others, "It's time to surrender. We need to get inside their camp like the commander told us." Seeing the enemy crawling towards Charles to give themselves up, the Dawn Alliance soldiers started to cheer. Wave after wave of sound rang around the camp walls. "Long live Charles!" shouted someone. "And long live the Dawn Alliance!" shouted another. "Did you see that fireball? I've never seen anything like it," said someone else. Even though Charles hadn't taken any physical part in the fighting, he had masterminded it and had given the orders. He knew that he would be judged by the outcome of the battle, not just by his own actions. The crowd was excited. They had seen Charles unleash an unstoppable force on their enemy, and his reputation as a military commander increased once again. "Did you see how that level 5 paranormal just exploded and fell apart?" said someone in the crowd to his friend. "Yeah, and all those other level 4s were injured. Charles is amazing," came the reply. Fanaticism grew among the members of the Dawn Alliance, as they realized they had not just a brilliant, almost invincible leader, but also a group of expert paranormals around him who would protect them. For perhaps the first time in their lives, they felt secure. Charles and his deputies began to debrief. Olivia said, "Stellar Technologies' morale must have suffered a huge blow after that." "Yes," said Alice. "They'll be thinking we're invincible now. They haven't seen level 5 power unleashed like that before, and they know we have more where that came from." Olivia replied, "I was a bit surprised, though. It's not often we manage to take out not just a level 5 paranormal, but a whole group of level 4s as well." Charles ordered, "Take what's left of the enemy platoon into custody. They've surrendered and might be useful to us." Stellar Technology retreated to reorganize and plan its next move. Their commanders knew that morale would be low after the spy platoon's defeat, and they didn't want their frontline troops to be afraid of going into battle again when they launched a large-scale attack. Charles closed the energy shield and returned to the watchtower, the cheers of the Dawn Alliance members ringing in his ears. Although the main war had not yet started, this victory had excited them almost as much as if it had been the final victory. The light of day began to fade, and as the sky turned dark, the Stellar Technology forces began to stir, and the Dawn Alliance soldiers were put on alert. As they made themselves battle-ready, the sound of fighting echoed through the fortress, and Charles, who had been busy cultivating, opened his eyes and ran out of the watchtower. He was met by the sight of several injured and dead soldiers, with Elena holding her gun over them. They insisted on barging in. I had no way of keeping them out, so my only option was to shoot them, she said to Charles. One of the soldiers shouted at her, "What are you talking about? We just wanted to see your leader, but you killed some of my troops." Elena looked angrily at her captives. She was the most murderous of Charles's team and had not the slightest compunction in killing their enemies. The captives who she had only injured had gotten off lightly. Charles called Olivia, who hurried into the room. He asked her, "Whose people are they?" She didn't know who they were. Of course, she couldn't possibly know every member of the Dawn Alliance, but she could recognize all their paranormals. Shaking her head, she said, "They're not from the Dawn Alliance." One of the injured soldiers angrily said, "We're here as reinforcements to help your leader, and we just wanted to ask for his instructions. We didn't expect to be treated like this. As you obviously don't want our help, we'd better leave." Then he ordered his remaining troops to get up, and they all headed to the door. As the leader turned around to leave, Charles attacked him from behind, strangling him, and then he punched the others back down to the ground. He said to Tina, "Get them out of here, and don't let them talk to each other. Don't show them any mercy." "Will do," replied Tina. "Hugh, Tommy, get your act together. I can't move them all by myself. You'll have to help me." The 3 Alliance officers dragged the dead and wounded soldiers away. Miranda frowned and asked Charles, "Are they here to assassinate us?" Charles shook his head. "They're far too weak to assassinate anyone. Elena overcame them single-handedly, so they wouldn't have stood a chance if they'd tried to kill any of us." "So what's going on then?" said Olivia. "Do you think they were going to take us hostage?" "No," replied Charles. "They were too weak even to manage that. I wonder..." He looked thoughtfully for a moment, and then he glanced at Elena. Almost as if she could hear Charles thinking, Elena said, "Are they targeting Jenny?" Elena had worked out that the combined strength of the intruders hadn't been enough to threaten a level 5 paranormal like Charles, so they must have been looking for a weaker target. In the watchtower, there was only one person who, if threatened, would force Charles's hand, and that was Jenny, Elena's daughter. Elena assumed that the enemy knew he would give himself up if Jenny was in danger. "I'm so sorry," she said. "It's all my fault. Jenny's my daughter, so I'm responsible for all this." "No," replied Charles. "It's not your fault. This is my decision." He wasn't the sort of man to shirk responsibility, and didn't want Elena to feel bad about what had happened. Charles turned to Olivia and ordered, "Stay here. I'm putting you in charge of defense." "I'll take care of it," replied Olivia. Charles hadn't told Olivia about Jenny, but she had guessed that Elena was Jenny's mother, and wondered who the girl's father might be. Charles was well known as a womanizer, but Olivia didn't think Elena had slept with him. Elena was a strong, independent woman, not at all clingy or needing a man in her life. But, thought Olivia, It is a bit strange that he allows her to live on the 7th floor of the watchtower. I wonder why that could be. Before she could ponder the mystery any further, Charles asked her, "Where's Hank?" Olivia thought for a moment and said, "I think he went to the city wall with some of your senior officers." Charles looked furious and said, "Find him, break his legs, and bring him to me." Olivia told 2 of her officers to fetch Hank, feeling there was something strange about Charles's order. A few minutes later, the officers appeared with Hank, but his legs hadn't been broken. Her officers hadn't deliberately disobeyed her order, but they knew that Hank was one of Charles's men, and thought that if anyone was going to punish Hank, it should be Charles. When Hank looked at Charles and saw his angry expression, he began to tremble uncontrollably. "I didn't do anything," he cried helplessly. "You can't punish me when I haven't done anything." Charles aimed a vicious kick at Hank's head, and as Hank collapsed to the ground, Charles said, "I haven't told you what you've done yet." Hank was terrified, and all sorts of thoughts were whirling around in his head. He was scared that he had revealed his weakness, and said in a shaky voice, "If you're going to kill me, make it quick. I know I've played around and used my powers to intimidate people into doing what I want, but they all seemed willing. You're surely not going to punish me with death for that." It was well known that Hank always tried to have an easy life. By staying close to Charles, he had obtained a lot of benefits. When everyone else was out hunting or fighting, Hank could pretty much do whatever he liked with no one there to see what he was doing. He made a lot of money from some shady deals during the establishment of the Dawn Alliance, and he knew that wealth brought influence. Charles had always turned a blind eye to how his team used their downtime, as long as it didn't seriously impact their operations, knowing that they needed an outlet for the stress of battle. Some drank too much, some indulged in sex, and Hank did his dodgy deals. "Let me ask you something, Hank," Charles said. "Why did you suddenly decide to go to the city wall today? You usually work with Tommy and the others, but today, you disappeared off to the wall by yourself. What for? Why did you do that?" Hank looked uncertain. I did it for you, boss." "You went there for me?" Charles replied. "Why? What made you think I'd want you to do that? I know you've made a lot of money since you joined up with the Dawn Alliance, and I understand that you want more and more. But selling our information to make money? You thought it was acceptable to trade secrets for cash?" "Oh yes, there's no need to pretend. I know exactly what you've been up to, you treacherous scumbag." Charles had been thinking about Hank, and had realized some time ago that he seemed to be far happier than usual. Now it all started to make sense, and Charles despised traitors. Flashing his cash around has given him away, the idiot, thought Charles. It's obvious. Either he's been taking bribes, or he's been selling information. Getting so close to me has given him access to knowledge that most other people wouldn't have. Knowledge that they'd pay handsomely for. "You think I don't realize that your sort of wealth isn't going to come from ordinary trading?" he said. "You fool. I could tell you must have another source of income. The only way to make that sort of money is bribery, or trading in Dawn Alliance secrets. So which was it, Hank?" Hank was scared out of his wits. Still on the ground before Charles nursing his injured head, he tried to beg for mercy. "I've never betrayed you," he cried. "I haven't told anyone anything." Charles replied, "You surely don't expect me to believe that. How else has the enemy worked out my weak spot? You might not have given them high-level documents, but just by speaking to them, you betrayed me, Olivia, Tina, everyone, the whole of the Dawn Alliance." "But Charles, please, you have to believe me. I didn't tell them anything at all," cried Hank, fearing for his life. "I know a traitor when I see one," said Charles. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it deliberately. You became their man on the inside, a nasty little spy. How else did you know to be out of the way during the battle?" Hank curled up on the ground, unable to say anything else. It was hopeless. He knew that no matter what he said, Charles wouldn't believe his lies. Charles had worked out the truth about him, and this was the end of the road for Hank. Charles turned to Elena and said, "This is my fault. I blame myself. None of you could have been expected to watch this traitor all the time. I'll leave you to deal with him. I think you'll enjoy that." Looking at Hank with pure hatred for what might have happened to her daughter, Elena thanked Charles enthusiastically and thought, "I won't give Hank an easy death, not after what he's done. I'll make sure he suffers horribly, Charles, please, spare me! Wailed Hank in despair. He knew what Elena was like, and knew what he had coming to him. She had a reputation as a vicious and enthusiastic killer, and Hank just hoped it would all be over quickly. Death would come as a relief from the torture he knew she would inflict on him. Having witnessed what had passed between Charles and Hank, the senior Alliance officials were worried. Charles's confidence and prestige were very valuable to them, and he never questioned how they went about Alliance business. They also knew that they couldn't come close to his skill level, but that day's events had made them realize it would be dangerous to do anything, no matter how small, against him. If Charles is happy to say that Hank was selling our secrets, then that's good enough for me, said one of the senior officers. I agree, said another. If we were to rebel, we know what the consequence would be. If Charles picked up even a hint of a mutiny, we'd be dead. I know. Let's not even think about it, replied the other officer. After handing over Hank to Elena to deal with, Charles didn't wait around to see the outcome. Instead, he called Alice and Zach over to him and said, "Come with me. Leave the defenses to Olivia. She's perfectly capable." The three of them disappeared into the night, and even though the other members of the Dawn Alliance wondered what they were doing, none of them dared go and ask. "Time to get on with our work," said Olivia. "Come on, there's plenty to do." As she turned to walk away, a violent explosion rocked the energy shield and sent everyone running for their lives.